They sent us a bill for our own son. Commander Eva Rostova watched the message dissolve on the main bridge screen of the jurisdiction fleet ship Just Accord. Her knuckles were white where she gripped the command chair's armrest. Below her, the verdant sphere of Kepler 186f, now formally designated Aurora, turned slowly a marble of impossible life in the void. For 5 years, her fleet had guarded the colony's fragile beginnings. They had built the cradle, strung the net, and now the self-proclaimed landlords of this galactic arm had come to collect. The Cathar Imperium called it a gratitude tithe, a retroactive invoice for cosmic services rendered. Rostova called it extortion under a banner of law. She knew this confrontation would not be won with weapons, but in the cold, unforgiving light of a public inquiry. The air on the bridge was a low hum of controlled fury. Tactical Officer Jian Li's fingers danced over her console, her expression a mask of professional calm. Commander, their fleet is holding position just outside the system's legal demarcation line. 3 inviolable class arbiters. They are broadcasting the tithe demand on all public channels citing the stewardship accords of the elder races. Rostova nodded the name of the ancient treaty, a bitter taste. It was a document so old and labyrinthine that entire species had used its loopholes to build empires. The Cathar were masters of it. Solon, give me a preliminary analysis of the tithe's specifics. Rostova said, her voice steady. The ship's integrated fleet mind. Solon manifested as a calm blue lattice of light on the secondary screen. Commander, the Cathar claim their ancestors stabilized this star 900 millennia ago. The tithe is calculated as a percentage of the total energy output the star has provided to this planet since its seeding. They have accounted for atmospheric filtering, geothermal stability, and projected evolutionary potential. The AI's voice was devoid of emotion, a pure stream of data that made the demand even more obscene. They had billed humanity for evolution itself. This was the kind of fight that could break a species. It is by their legal framework a valid claim. Solon continued, the light lattice subtly shifting. Their historical records are authenticated and cross-referenced with Galactic Concordance archives. The stewardship accords do permit such claims provided the claimant can prove uninterrupted and uncontested custodianship. Rostova's jaw tightened. Uncontested for 900,000 years, because humanity hadn't even been dreaming of fire yet, let alone spaceflight. It was a perfect legal trap designed to crush nascent civilizations before they became a threat. And the Cathar method was legendary for its quiet, systemic cruelty. They taught worlds the meaning of debt. First Officer Marcus Thorne stepped beside her, his face grim. They're not just billing us Eva, they're issuing a collar. The tithe document includes a lien against the colony itself. If we don't pay, they claim legal authority to manage the asset until the debt is cleared. Manage was a euphemism. It meant indentured servitude on a planetary scale. It was a slow legal genocide, and they had brought the ships to enforce the verdict. Rostova looked from the alien vessels on the screen to the living world below. No, this would not be a battle of cannons and shields. This would be a war of ledgers and laws fought in an arena where the Cathar believed they were gods. Humanity was about to teach them about discovery and the high cost of a surprise audit. A civilian vignette flickered across a side monitor, an open channel from Aurora. A child no older than 7 was holding up a crudely drawn picture of a sun with a smiling face for her off-world grandparents. "Look, Grandma, I drew Helios," she chirped, her voice full of innocent pride. "He's warm today." The feed was one of thousands. Solon monitored a constant stream of life from the world they were here to protect. Rostova felt a fresh wave of resolve wash over her. That child's son was not for sale. The Cathar wanted to own their star, to put a price on the light that warmed a child's face. "Jian, open a channel to the lead arbiter," Rostova commanded, her voice ringing with newfound steel. "Formal greeting. Acknowledge receipt of their claim. Inform them we are reviewing the documentation with our own legal counsel." She paused, letting the weight of her next words settle on the bridge. And Solon began a deep dive into the stewardship accords. "I want every precedent, every footnote, every amendment from the last 1,000,000 years. We are going to mirror their own justice back at them." The AI's blue lattice pulsed once a silent acknowledgement. The game had begun. The price of light was about to be contested. Rostova knew the Cathar operated with the serene confidence of a predator that had never missed a meal. Their inviolable class arbiters were not primarily warships. They were mobile courthouses, their primary systems dedicated to computational lawfare and the projection of legal authority. Each ship was a library of precedent, a tribunal waiting to happen. The Cathar didn't need to conquer. They simply proved with crushing archival certainty that you already belonged to them. They were the ultimate parasites, cloaking their hunger in the robes of ancient tradition. But humanity had a different tradition. They questioned the rules. Commander Solon's voice cut through the quiet tension. "The Cathar have responded. They accept our acknowledgement and have transmitted a formal invitation to a preliminary hearing. They propose the neutral space of the system's 5th planet, a gas giant, as the venue. They cite Section 4, Sub-Article 12 of the Accords. Disputes over stewardship tithes shall be first addressed by a non-binding inquiry to establish foundational facts." It was the move she expected, a public spectacle designed to humiliate them and showcase their own mastery of the law. This was their arena, and they were inviting her to the slaughter. They believed they held a perfect hand. Marcus stepped closer, his voice a low murmur for her ears only. "It's a trap, Eva. They'll frame the narrative before we can even present a counter-argument. The inquiry will be broadcast. They want to make an example of us to show the other younger races what happens when you settle in Cathar space." He wasn't wrong. The broadcast would reach dozens of systems. The Cathar were not just trying to collar Aurora. They were reinforcing their reputation across the entire sector. They built their empire on the illusion of inevitability. "I know," Rostova replied, her eyes fixed on the image of the lead Cathar arbiter, the gavel of inevitability. "But we can't refuse. Refusing the inquiry is an admission of guilt under the Accords. They've cornered us." She turned to face her command crew. "But they've also given us a platform. They think they're going to be the judges. We're going to turn that inquiry into a public audit of their own accounts." A flicker of understanding crossed Jian Li's face. This wasn't just about defense. It was about a counterclaim. The human fleet would not be fighting a war. It would be conducting an intervention. Solon Rostova said, a new strategy taking shape in her mind. Cross-reference the Cathar claim with stellar dynamics. They claim they stabilized this star. I want to know what that means. What was the state of the star before their alleged intervention? What actions did they take, and most importantly, what was the energy cost of those actions? The ORI processed the request instantly. The Cathar archives are sealed regarding the specific methodologies of their stewardship actions. They cite proprietary ancestral knowledge. A faint, almost imperceptible note of digital challenge entered Solon's tone. The Cathar method relied on hiding the math. Rostova smiled faintly. Of course they do. They present the bill but never the receipt. They want us to argue the law, the interpretation of the Accords. We're going to argue the numbers. We're going to demand a public accounting. She looked at the star they called Helios, a brilliant G-type main sequence star, no different from thousands of others. The Cathar claimed they had tamed it. Humanity was about to ask for the names of the trainers. They were going to teach the galaxy about the burden of proof. On Aurora, a teacher was leading a group of young students in a field of native grasses. "And see this flower," she said, pointing to a delicate six-petaled bloom that tracked the sun. "It's called a sun-seeker. It follows Helios all day long from dawn until dusk. It's a reminder that all life here is connected to our star." One of the children, a boy with bright, curious eyes, looked up at the sky. "Does everyone have a sun?" he asked. The teacher smiled warmly. "Every world that has life like ours does. It's the most important gift." The Cathar saw a resource to be taxed. The humans on the ground saw a gift to be cherished. This fundamental difference was the heart of the conflict. The just accord moved a silent predator of chrome and righteous fury toward the designated coordinates. The gas giant loomed in the view screen, a swirling behemoth of ochre and cream clouds. The three Cathar arbiters were already there, their forms stark and angular against the planet's majestic curves. They were positioned in a perfect triangular formation, a symbol of stability and order. It was all part of their psychological warfare. They projected an aura of unshakable ancient authority. They were the law. They were the order. Humanity was about to introduce them to the concept of chaos theory. "We are in position," Commander Jian reported. "The Cathar are hailing us. They wish to establish the protocols for the inquiry." Rostova took a deep breath. "Patch them through to the main screen. Let's see what their masters of law look like." The image shimmered, then resolved. The being on the screen was tall and slender, encased in a form-fitting golden shell that seemed to flow like liquid. Its head was elongated, and its large black eyes held a placid, almost bored expression. This was High Arbiter Zethol. His species, the Cathar, had long ago abandoned the messiness of flesh for elegant cybernetic carapaces. Commander Rostova Zethol's voice was a melodic, synthesized tone, impossibly ancient and patient. "On behalf of the Cathar Imperium, I welcome you to this inquiry. We trust this matter can be resolved with the clarity and efficiency befitting civilized species." The condescension was a palpable force. He was speaking to her as one would a particularly bright, but ultimately primitive animal. He was here to teach her the rules of the galactic game. High Arbiter Rostova replied, her own voice a carefully modulated instrument of calm professionalism. "Humanity appreciates the opportunity to clarify this matter. We believe there has been a significant misunderstanding, one which we are eager to correct." Zethol's smooth faceplate betrayed no emotion, but Rostova could feel the amusement radiating from him. A misunderstanding. He had heard it all before. Every fledgling race squealed and wriggled when the collar was first presented. It was a predictable and, to him, tedious part of the process. "Your people are new to this arm of the galaxy," Commander Zethol said, his voice dripping with false magnanimity. "It is understandable you might not be familiar with the ancient laws that govern it. The stewardship accords are the foundation of peace und Erholung. The gratitude tithe is a recognition of that order, a small price for the stability we have maintained for eons." He gestured with a three-fingered metallic hand. "Your colony exists because of our ancestors' work. The tithe is merely an acknowledgement of that debt. They never called it a price. They called it a debt. We do not dispute the age of the accords, High Arbiter," Rostova countered, leaning forward slightly. "We dispute the premise of your claim. You have presented us with a bill for services rendered. We, as the recipients of these alleged services, are formally requesting an itemized invoice before this inquiry proceeds." A flicker, a bare millisecond of something crossed Zethol's otherwise impassive face. It was not anger. It was not confusion. It was the faint, almost imperceptible annoyance of a bureaucrat asked to do unexpected paperwork. They had expected legal arguments, not a financial audit. Humanity remembered by ledgers. Zthol recovered smoothly. The work of our ancestors is a matter of historical record, not a commercial transaction. Commander, the energy signatures of their stellar stabilization efforts are imprinted on the star itself. To question them is to question the very fabric of reality. He was trying to frame her request as an act of sacrilege, a blasphemy against the past. It was a common tactic of those who dealt in faith-based economies. The Cathar wanted to be treated not as creditors, but as priests. Then you should have no objection to making that record public. Rostova pressed her voice, unwavering. If the evidence is imprinted on the star, let us read it together. We request a full accounting of the energy expended in your stabilization, the methodology used, and the precise verifiable change in the star's output as a direct result of your actions. Once we have that, we can discuss what, if any, gratitude is owed. She had drawn her line in the sand. This was not a negotiation about the amount of the tithe. It was a challenge to its very existence. The Cathar claim was a ghost story, and she had just turned on the lights. A long silence stretched between the two ships. Zthol's black eyes stared out from the screen. He was recalculating. This was not the standard script. The primitives were supposed to be pleading for mercy, or making foolish threats, or trying to find a loophole in paragraph 7, subsection B. They were not supposed to be demanding to see the receipts from 900,000 years ago. The very request implied that the Cathar Imperium, the ancient stewards of the galaxy, could be wrong, or worse, that they could be lying. A new dangerous variable had been introduced into his perfect equation. That variable was human audacity. Your request is unorthodox, Commander Rostova. Zthol finally said, the melodic quality of his voice slightly strained. The methodologies of the elders are not for public dissemination. They are a sacred trust. This was the core of their power. Their actions were beyond question. They were a self-auditing entity, their own judge and jury. Their ledger was written in invisible ink. A trust that comes with a rather substantial bill, Marcus muttered under his breath. Rostova heard him, but kept her focus on Zthol. We are not asking for your sacred texts, High Arbiter. We are asking for the math. The accords you cherish are built on the principle of verifiable claims. An unverifiable claim is not a law, it is a superstition. And humanity does not pay taxes to ghosts. The finality in her tone was absolute. The gauntlet had been thrown. The inquiry was about to become a trial, and the Cathar themselves were now the ones under scrutiny. Their perfect legal weapon was being turned against them. On Aurora, the colony's chief astrophysicist, Dr. Aris Thorne, Marcus's brother, was briefing the Planetary Council. His face was projected onto a large screen in their assembly hall. The Cathar claim is scientifically tenuous, Aris said, adjusting his glasses. They claim to have stabilized a G-type main sequence star. That's like claiming you stabilized a rock. These stars are, by their very nature, the most stable and long-lived objects in the universe. The idea that it needed taming 900,000 years ago for a period of time that is statistically insignificant in its lifespan is suspect. He pointed to a complex graph of stellar evolution. Barring an external cataclysm which their records do not mention, this star was never in any danger. They are billing us for curing a disease the patient never had. The council members exchanged worried glances. The science was on their side, but the law was not. Back in the void, Sthol's golden faceplate was a mask of cold fury. He had ended the transmission without another word. The preliminary hearing was over. The battle lines were drawn. He's angry, Jian said, a hint of satisfaction in her voice. I've analyzed his vocal patterns and micro-expressions. He's moving from contempt to genuine anger. We've unsettled him. Rostova nodded. Good. Anger makes people make mistakes. Solon, what's the chatter on the public channels? The Cathar broadcast of the tithe demand had been picked up by dozens of systems. The audience for this little drama was growing. The reaction is mixed, Commander Solon reported. Older races aligned with the Cathar are broadcasting messages of support for the tithe. They speak of tradition, respect for the elders, and the cost of order. Newer races, particularly those in developing systems, are silent. They are watching. They have likely faced similar claims themselves. This was the key. The Cathar's power was built on a network of fear and precedent. If humanity could prove the foundation of their claims was rotten, the entire edifice might begin to crumble. This was bigger than Aurora. This was a chance to set a new precedent for the whole galaxy. They were not just fighting for their colony. They were fighting for every world living under the shadow of an ancient, unpayable debt. They will retaliate, Marcus warned. Not with weapons, but with law. They'll file injunctions, motions, and procedural roadblocks. They will try to bury us in paperwork until we suffocate. He was right. The Cathar were masters of bureaucratic warfare. They could tie up the just accord in legal limbo for decades, draining their resources and their resolve, all while the colony on Aurora withered on the vine. This had to be resolved quickly and decisively. The public inquiry had to be a scalpel, not a sledgehammer. Let them, Rostova said, her eyes gleaming with a fierce light. Every motion they file is another document we can analyze. Every injunction they seek is another opportunity for us to demand evidence. They think paper can bury us. We're going to build a mirror out of it and show them their own reflection. She turned to her AI. Solon, you are our chief counsel. Begin drafting our formal petition for the public inquiry. Title it, A Petition for the Full and Public Accounting of the Alleged Stellar Stabilization of Star Kepler 186. We are moving from defense to prosecution. We are putting the Cathar's entire business model on trial. The AI's lattice shimmered, processing the command. A bold strategy, Commander. It will be perceived as an act of extreme aggression by the established powers. There was a new quality to Solon's voice, a flicker of something that might have been digital admiration. The AI was designed for legal analysis, for the cold calculus of probability. Rostova was asking it to participate in a gamble, a high-stakes play that went against all conventional wisdom. She was teaching the machine about human defiance. It is an act of aggression, Solon Rostova admitted. It's an aggressive demand for the truth. Let the old powers call it what they will. We call it balancing the books. The just accord held its position, a lone bastion of human resolve in the silent darkness. The gas giant swirled below, indifferent to the drama unfolding in its orbit. The Cathar arbiters were silent, their golden hulls reflecting the distant starlight. But on their bridges, Rostova knew a frantic recalculation was underway. The primitives were not following the script. The quarry was turning on the hunter, and the entire sector was watching to see what would happen next. The great cosmic shakedown was about to be audited. In the days that followed, the void between the human fleet and the Cathar arbiters became a battlefield of light and data. The Cathar, as Marcus predicted, unleashed a procedural storm. They filed motions to dismiss challenges to jurisdiction and demands for clarification on the definition of every term in humanity's petition, from accounting to star. It was a classic legal filibuster designed to exhaust and overwhelm. Each motion was broadcast on public channels, framed as a patient attempt to educate the unruly newcomers. The Cathar were painting themselves as the calm, rational adults in the room. But Rostova's strategy was working. With every motion, the Cathar filed Solon, and the legal team aboard the Just Accord responded with a simple, unwavering counter-demand: provide the primary data. You challenge our definition of accounting. Provide the data and we can discuss it. You question our jurisdiction, the data will establish the facts of the case. You wish to dismiss the data is the very foundation of your claim. Without it, there is nothing to dismiss. They turned every Cathar attack into another request for the same thing. They were a broken record of reason. The cost of their method was a relentless, infuriating logic. The tide of opinion on the public channels began to shift. At first, there was amusement at the humans' audacity. Then, as the Cathar continued to deflect and evade, a new narrative began to form. The silent watching races began to murmur. Why wouldn't the Cathar just show their work? If their claim was so ironclad, what was there to hide? The Cathar's refusal to provide evidence was becoming more damning than any argument the humans could make. Their silence was a confession. They were masters of the law, but they had forgotten a simple human truth: you can't fool all of the people all of the time. Aboard the gavel of inevitability, High Arbiter Zethol was experiencing an emotion his people had not felt in millennia: pressure. His private chamber was a minimalist space of flowing metal and soft, indirect light. He stood before a projection of the Cathar Imperium's central council. The faces of the other arbiters were as placid and unreadable as his own, but the energy in the silent room was thick with concern. They are relentless, one of the council members synthesized. They do not engage with the legal arguments. They simply repeat their demand for the raw data. It is primitive, but effective. They are turning our own transparency against us, another added. By broadcasting the inquiry, we sought to make an example of them. Now they are using that same public stage to question our core authority. The Cathar Empire was built on a foundation of unquestioned historical claims. To allow one to be publicly audited was to invite scrutiny of them all. It was a threat to their entire way of life. Zethol finally spoke, his voice retaining its melodic calm, but with an undercurrent of something hard and sharp. The humans are behaving like a rogue algorithm. They have found a single logical inconsistency and are exploiting it in a recursive loop. They do not understand honor. They do not understand tradition. They understand only numbers. He paused. Very well. We will give them numbers. A new strategy was forming in his ancient calculating mind. If the humans wanted to play a game of accounting, he would show them the true meaning of a rigged ledger. The Cathar were about to make their second great mistake. Back on the Just Accord, an alert chimed on the main console. Commander Jian said, her eyes wide. We are receiving a massive data transfer from the Cathar. It's the historical data we requested. Or at least they claim it is. The bridge crew exchanged looks of stunned disbelief. They had expected another legal maneuver, another delay. They had not expected the Cathar to actually call their bluff. It was a plan-changing escalation. Solon, get it on the main screen, Rostova ordered, her mind racing. Isolate it in a secure sandbox. Scan it for any malicious component. I want to know what they've sent us. The AI worked in silence for a few moments. Then the main screen filled with a dizzying array of complex equations, stellar charts, and energy readings. It was a torrent of information, an overwhelming flood of technobabble designed to intimidate and confuse. The data appears to be authentic, Commander Solon reported. It is a complete record of the stellar stabilization of Kepler-186, dated approximately 917,000 years ago. Marcus Thorne studied the screen, his brow furrowed. It looks real. too real. Why would they just hand it over? This is what we've been fighting for. He was right to be suspicious. This was not a surrender. It was a new kind of attack. The Cathar were trying to drown them in the very evidence they had demanded. Solon begin. Analysis, Rostova commanded. Find the core of their argument. What was the specific action they took? What was the cost, and what was the result? The AI's blue lattice pulsed faster, sifting through petabytes of data. For several long minutes, the only sound on the bridge was the quiet hum of the ship's systems. The crew watched the screen, trying to make sense of the arcane symbols and graphs. It was a history of a star, written in a language of forgotten physics. Then Solon spoke, and its voice was different. There was a new tone, a digital edge of something that sounded like surprise. Commander, I have isolated the key event. The Cathar did not merely stabilize the star. According to this data, they performed a targeted stellar ignition. Rostova felt a chill run down her spine. Stellar ignition. It was a theoretical technology, a way to artificially start the fusion process in a brown dwarf or a gas giant, creating a new star. It was an act of cosmic creation. Explain, Solon, she said, her voice tight. The data indicates that Kepler-186 was not always a G-type main sequence star. It was a brown dwarf, a failed star, emitting only a tiny fraction of its current energy, the AI elaborated. The Cathar, using a technology we do not possess, ignited it. They created this sun. The bridge was silent. The sheer scale of the claim was staggering. They hadn't just tamed a star. They had built it from scratch. Giantly was the first to speak, her voice a whisper. My God, if that's true, then their claim is valid. They didn't just steward this system. They created it. The weight of the revelation settled on the crew. The Cathar's bill was not for maintenance. It was for genesis. The gratitude tithe was not just a tax on light. It was a royalty payment to the gods who had said, "Let there be light, let there be." Rostova stared at the screen at the elegant, irrefutable physics of the Cathar's claim. Zuthol had not just called her bluff. He had raised the stakes to a level she could not have imagined. He had given her the numbers she had asked for, and those numbers were telling her that humanity was living in a borrowed house warmed by a borrowed fire. This changed everything. The Cathar had not just checked her, they had checkmated her, or so it seemed. The first part of their mystery was revealed. Now came the accounting. A new civilian vignette played out on the side monitor. On Aurora, the colony was celebrating its 5th anniversary. Families were gathered in the main plaza of the capital city Promise. There were fireworks not of gunpowder, but of focused, harmless light, painting the night sky with brilliant colors. A father had his daughter on his shoulders. "Look, Alara," he said, pointing to the sky. "Isn't it beautiful? All of this is ours. We built it with our own hands." The pride in his voice was the sound of a people who believed they had earned their home. But the data scrolling on the Just Accord's main screen told a different story. Their home was a gift, and the gift giver had come to collect. Rostova felt the trap closing. The Cathar had presented evidence that was on its face unassailable. To challenge it would be to deny a feat of astro-engineering that bordered on the divine. The public inquiry would now be a formality. She would have to stand before the galactic community and admit that humanity was not just a tenant, but a squatter. The collar would be placed on Aurora, and humanity's reputation as a clever upstart race would be shattered. They would be known as the species that tried to audit God and lost. This was the Cathar's true power. They didn't just defeat you, they made you complicit in your own subjugation. "Commander, what are our options?" Marcus asked, his voice heavy with defeat. The fighting spirit had gone out of him. He was a good soldier, a brilliant tactician, but this was a battle on a scale he had never been trained for. How do you fight a legal claim backed by an act of creation? Rostova did not answer immediately. She looked away from the data screen toward the live feed of Aurora. She saw the faces of the colonists celebrating their new lives, blissfully unaware of the cosmic debt hanging over their heads. She saw the children born on a world they believed was their own. And in that moment, her despair hardened into something else. It was not anger. It was not defiance. It was a cold, clear, calculating certainty. The kind of certainty that only comes when you have been pushed to the very edge and have found solid ground where there should have been only an abyss. She turned back to her crew. The despair on their faces was a mirror of what she had just felt. She had to give them a new reflection. "The Cathar have made a fatal error," she said, her voice quiet but ringing with absolute conviction. "They have given us the truth." Jian looked at her confused. "Commander, the truth is that they created the star. How does that help us?" This was the core of it all, the reveal that was supposed to be a payoff for the Cathar. They created the star, Rostova agreed, but they did not create the planet. All eyes on the bridge turned to her. The air crackled with a new energy. Solon run the data again. The Cathar ignited a brown dwarf. What was orbiting that brown dwarf before the ignition? The AI, which had been passively displaying the Cathar data, flared to life. Its lattice began to shift and reconfigure at a furious pace. It was running a new simulation, a new history of the system. This was the question no one, not even the Cathar, had thought to ask. The main screen split. On one side was the current vibrant system with the G-type star Helios at its center, and the life-bearing world of Aurora in its habitable zone. On the other side, a new image began to form, a ghostly reconstruction of the past. It showed a dim, cold system orbiting a faintly glowing brown dwarf. And in that ghostly image, in the same orbital path now occupied by Aurora, was another planet. It was a barren, frozen world, an ice ball sleeping in the twilight. Kepler 180 existed prior to the stellar ignition, Solon stated, its voice now humming with the energy of discovery. It was a rogue planet captured by the brown dwarf's gravity billions of years ago. Its composition is consistent with the current planet, minus the effects of a G-type star's radiation and heat for the last 900,000 years. The pieces were falling into place. The Cathar had not created a new system. They had renovated an old one. "They didn't create a home for us, they just turned on the furnace," Marcus said, a slow smile spreading across his face. The mood on the bridge had shifted from despair to a fierce, predatory excitement. They had found the flaw in the divine plan. The Cathar's ledger was not as clean as they had claimed. The Cathar taught by collars, but this human fleet remembered by numbers, precisely, Rostova said. They performed an undocumented, unapproved, and unilateral act of planetary terraforming on a world that did not belong to them. They are not our creators. They are our contractors, and they did the work without asking permission. She looked at the image of the ancient frozen world. They did not give us a gift. They fundamentally altered our property and then had the audacity to send us the bill for the renovations. This was the new foundation of their case. They would concede the stellar ignition. They would praise the Cathar for their incredible technological achievement. And then they would present them with a counterclaim. A bill for the irreversible transformation of a planet. A bill for the loss of its original state. A bill for the 900,000 years of environmental impact. They were going to mirror the Cathar's own logic back at them, using their own data as the weapon. The gratitude tithe was about to be answered with a liability invoice. The hunters were about to discover what it felt like to be prey. They came to put humanity in its place, and now they would learn their own. Draft. The counterclaim, Solon Rostova commanded the words cutting through the energized hum of the bridge. Title it, Liability Invoice for Unsolicited Planetary Alteration and Destruction of Unique Astronomical Body. Cite their own data as every single exhibit. She paced the command deck, her crew watching their focus absolute. The despair of moments ago had been burned away, replaced by the cold fire of a righteous hunt. They had been given a death sentence and had found a way to return it to the sender with postage due. Calculate the costs. Start with the baseline value of a unique pre-stellar rogue planet as a scientific artifact. Add the energy cost required to reverse the ignition and restore the planet to its original frozen state, a thermodynamic reckoning. Finally, add punitive damages for failing to file an environmental impact statement as required by the Accords for any action affecting a Class M capable world. They were going to bill the gods for moving heaven and earth without a permit. The resulting figure will be astronomical. Commander Solon stated its lattice glowing with the fury of pure calculation. It would be an unpayable debt designed to provoke, not persuade. The AI was processing the legal and strategic implications. This was not a negotiation. It was a declaration of total legal war. That is the point, Solon Marcus said, his grin sharp as a knife. We aren't trying to get them to pay. We're mirroring their own method. We're showing them what their collar feels like from the other side. This was the essence of their strategy, perfect, proportional, and utterly unforgiving reciprocity. Transmit the invoice to High Arbiter Zethel's vessel and post it to the Public Inquiry's official ledger, Rostova ordered. Time the transmission to arrive precisely 1 minute before the inquiry is scheduled to formally convene. Let him read it in front of the whole sector. Jian Li's fingers flew across her console. Transmission sent, Commander. It's on the public ledger now. There will be no taking it back. The die was cast. The Just Accord had just placed a lien against an entire star-faring empire. They had built their case not on defiance but on the simple, brutal arithmetic of consequence. On Aurora, the mood had shifted from celebration to a quiet, collective anxiety. News of the public inquiry had spread. In the capital city of promise, the light fireworks were gone, replaced by the soft glow of thousands of personal data slates as citizens followed the proceedings. In a small apartment overlooking the central plaza, the little girl Elara, who had drawn the sun, was now watching the public ledger feed with her parents. "Mommy, what are the bad people trying to do?" she asked, her voice small. Her mother hugged her close. "Some people think because they are old, they own everything, sweetie," she whispered. Her eyes fixed on the name, Just Accord, on the screen. Our friends in the sky are teaching them about sharing. This was the core of it all, a lesson learned in every human schoolyard, now being taught on a galactic scale. The formal inquiry, convened in a dimension of pure data, a holographic chamber projected between the fleets. Silent, shimmering sigils representing the dozens of watching systems formed a silent jury. High Arbiter Zathol materialized at his dais, his golden form radiating an aura of serene triumph. He had come to accept humanity's surrender. He raised his head, his black eyes sweeping across the virtual chamber, ready to deliver his verdict. And then he saw it. The human counterclaim blinking on the public ledger beside his own tithe. The charge was not just an answer. It was an accusation. A wave of murmurs rippled through the sigils of the assembled audience. The charge was unprecedented. Zathol's placid expression did not change, but the very air around his projection seemed to grow colder. He had expected a plea, a protest, perhaps a desperate legal gambit. He had not expected to be accused of cosmic vandalism. Commander Rostova, he began, his melodic voice now laced with a thread of crystalline ice. This is a frivolous and insulting maneuver, a desperate fiction from a species that cannot pay its rightful debts. He was trying to frame it as a tantrum, a childish outburst. Rostova's own holographic form solidified opposite him. She stood straight in her formal jurisdiction fleet uniform, a stark figure of blue and gray against his flowing gold. It is not a fiction, High Arbiter, she replied, her voice calm and clear, echoing through the silent chamber. It is an accounting based entirely on the evidence you so generously provided. We acknowledge your claim. You ignited the star. It was a feat of incredible power. We are in your debt for that action. She paused, letting the concession hang in the air, disarming him. However, your action was not performed in a vacuum. It was performed upon our property. She raised a hand, and the simulation Solon had created and filled the space between them. On one side, the frozen, sleeping world of the past. On the other, the living, breathing aurora of the present. You stand here as our creditor, demanding payment for the heat and light you provided. But we stand here as the owners of a world you fundamentally and irrevocably altered without consent. You did not create a world. You seized one and lit a fire in its heart. Her words were a cascade of undeniable logic. The Cathar were not creators. They were trespassers. Their grand act of genesis was reframed as an act of cosmic breaking and entering. Zethol's composure finally fractured. A flicker of raw, unprocessed fury crossed his faceplate. The planet was a worthless ball of ice. It was dead. We gave it the gift of life. We gave it a son. That is not a crime. It is a genesis. Your argument is an absurdity. He was falling back on the oldest defense of the powerful, that the victim should be grateful for the attention. It was not your gift to give, Rostova countered, her voice dropping, becoming more intense. Its worth was not for you to decide. It was a pristine scientific sample of a rogue planet, a testament to the history of this galaxy. You destroyed that history. You destroyed its potential to be studied, to be understood. You silenced 1 billion years of testimony to indulge in an act of cosmic arrogance. She gestured to the silent sigils around them. You call yourselves stewards, but a steward preserves. A steward protects. You are not stewards. You are vandals who mistook destruction for creation, and now you have sent the owners the bill for your tools. The accusation was devastating. The Cathar's entire identity was built on the idea of ancient wise preservation. Rostova had just called them cosmic hooligans. The chamber was silent for a long moment. The watching galaxy was processing this new explosive narrative. The Cathar, the ancient unassailable landlords of the void, were being portrayed as reckless vandals. Zethol, for the first time in his long existence, was on the defensive in his own court. He had walked into a coronation and found himself in the dock. The stewardship accords grant the elder races the right to cultivate fallow systems. He retorted, his voice strained as he grasped for a legal lifeline. We saw a system with no life and we ceded the potential for it. It is our right. It is our duty. The accords say you may cultivate. Rostova's voice was like a surgeon's scalpel, precise and cutting. They do not say you may demolish the existing structure before you begin. You have presented your bill for services rendered. We have presented ours for damages incurred. The ledgers are now balanced, High Arbiter. Your claim is nullified by our own. She had mirrored his every move, matched his every claim with a counterclaim of equal or greater weight. It was a perfect stalemate engineered to expose the rot at the heart of the Cathar's legal philosophy. They believed in their right to act. She believed in the right to be asked first. Zethol's golden form seemed to shrink slightly. The aura of inevitable authority that had surrounded him was gone, replaced by the stark, uncomfortable nakedness of a king with no clothes. He had no counter-argument. The data was his own. The logic was sound. He could not deny what he had done, and he could not deny the human's ownership of the planet that had been there first. He had been so focused on the star, he had never even considered the world beneath it. It was a failure of imagination, a failure of empathy, and it was about to cost his empire centuries of accumulated power. He had been outthought by a species that had only been using fire for a fraction of the time he had been practicing law. This is an insult to the memory of our ancestors. Zethal whispered the words, intended to be a solemn condemnation, but they came out sounding weak, defensive. It was the last resort of a scoundrel wrapping himself in the flag of the past. Rostova's face was unyielding. Your ancestors performed a mighty act of engineering, High Arbiter, but they forgot to ask. That is the lesson for today. Your bill is denied. Our bill is presented. They cancel each other out. We owe you nothing. She then delivered the final decisive blow. We are, however, willing to be merciful. We will forgive your debt to us, your liability for the destruction of our property. In exchange, you will not only withdraw your tithe against Aurora, but you will sign a public addendum to the Stewardship Accords, a new clause forever prohibiting any elder race from levying a tithe on a system where they have fundamentally altered a pre-existing planetary body without the consent of its eventual inhabitants. A Rostova proviso. It was a masterful move. She was not just winning the battle. She was rewriting the law to prevent the war from ever being fought again. She was offering him a way out that would save his empire from the humiliation of a public debt, but at the cost of forever surrendering the most powerful weapon in their legal arsenal. She was demanding a permanent precedent lock. She was teaching the entire galaxy a new way. The sigils of the watching systems began to pulse one by one. It was a vote. They were witnessing not just a legal dispute, but the birth of a new principle. The younger races, the silent watchers, pulsed with a bright, eager light. The older races, the allies of the Cathar, pulsed with a dim, reluctant glow. But they were all pulsing. They were accepting the new precedent. They were tired of living under the shadow of ancient, unpayable debts. The humans had not just saved themselves, they had offered a path to freedom for everyone. As Thol stared at the cascade of accepting sigils, the will of the galactic community manifesting before his eyes. He was beaten, not by weapons, not by threats, but by a simple, elegant application of his own logic. He had been caught in a perfect mirror of his own making. His empire was built on the sanctity of the Accords, and now the Accords were being amended to chain him. To refuse would be to declare himself an outlaw, to abandon the very source of his power. He was trapped. We accept the terms. Zathol finally synthesized the words, tasting like ash in his metallic mouth. The melodic quality was gone, replaced by the flat, dead tone of defeat. The inquiry was over. The tithe was dead. The law had been changed. A new entry began to form on the public ledger, the text of the Rostova Proviso locking itself into the permanent legal code of the galaxy. The cost of victory for humanity had been the risk of everything, but the price of their mercy was a future free from cosmic extortion for all. Back on the just accord, a wave of cheers erupted across the bridge. Jian Li was laughing, tears in her eyes. Marcus Thorne clapped Rostova on the shoulder, his face split by a wide grin. "Ava, you did it. You beautiful, crazy bastard, you did it." Rostova allowed herself a small, weary smile. She felt the immense weight of the past weeks lift from her shoulders. She looked at the main screen where the three Cathar arbiters were beginning a slow, silent turn, preparing to leave the system. They had come as landlords. They were leaving as humbled contractors who had been taught a sharp lesson about reading the fine print. But Rostova knew this was not a total victory. It was a truce. The Cathar would not forget this. They had been publicly humiliated, their authority challenged and permanently curtailed. She had not destroyed an enemy. She had created a rival one who would be watching, waiting for any misstep. That was one cost. Another was the knowledge of their own world's history. The people of Aurora would now forever know that their sun was not a natural gift, but a piece of alien technology. Their creation story was now a lawsuit. It was a subtle wound, but it would linger. The win had been earned, and the scars would be a reminder of the price. Solon's voice, calm and steady as ever, cut through the celebration. Commander, the new precedent is locked on the public ledger. The Cathar fleet is departing the system. Our legal obligations are concluded. Rostova nodded, turning her gaze back to the swirling gas giant, the silent witness to their confrontation. The battle had been won not with phasers or torpedoes, but with logic, audacity, and a deep, unshakable belief in a simple principle: no one gets to own the sun. The mirror arrays on the Just Accord, which had been running at full power to broadcast their arguments and simulations across the sector, began to cool. A faint haze of dissipated energy shimmered around their edges before vanishing into the void. The court was adjourned. The case was closed. Rostova looked at the vibrant living world of Aurora on her screen, a world her crew had just saved from a fate of slow legal strangulation. They had not fought for territory or for resources. They had fought for a principle. They had taught an ancient empire that the past does not grant ownership of the future, and that no debt is valid if it is built on a lie. They came to teach us the meaning of debt. We taught them the meaning of discovery.